You guys may be seated. Nobody but Jesus, right? Nobody but Jesus. All right, welcome everybody. How are we doing? I see what you're doing. All right, go ahead and grab your Bibles and turn to Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. We are literally in the middle of a series titled The Ten Commandments. We're talking about what God expects of everyday people. So we're walking through the Ten Commandments. And I've told you several times how the Ten Commandments fall into two different categories or two different tables, as theologians like to put it. The first table regulates our relationship with... That's a question. The first table regulates our relationship with God. That's right. The second table regulates our relationship with other people. That's right. Two different tables, our relationship with God and our relationship with other people. But today we start the fifth commandment, which sort of makes that turn toward other people, because the fifth commandment talks about our relationship with our father and mother. Our parents, right? Now, something very, very interesting about the fifth commandment. Scholars who divide these commandments up into category, they differ. They're not in complete agreement as to whether this fifth commandment goes with the top table, regulating our relationship with God, or the bottom table, regulating our relationship with other people. Now, it's obvious how some people would think it would go into the category with other people, because our parents are people. Our parents are people. Now, when we're kids, we really don't think of our parents as people, do we? I mean, I'm serious. I mean, we really don't. Our parents ain't people, they're our parents. I mean, we don't think of them as people who have feelings and wants and needs and all that stuff. You know, they're our parents. But let me remind you, they are our people. And so for that reason, many people assume that the fifth commandment goes with the other commandments that pertain to other people. Are you tracking with me? Yeah, but something very interesting. The fifth commandment says, honor your father and mother, then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God has given you. It's that reference to the Lord your God that all the other commandments have. And not only that, but it connects the way God's blessings flow into your life, and that's connected to the way you treat your parents. You see it? The fifth commandment is the only commandment with a promise. It says, honor your father and mother, then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God has given you, right? And so, again, it's connected, the way you honor your father and mother, it's connected to the way you treat your parents. You see that there? Yeah. And for that reason, there's a lot of people who think the fifth commandment goes into the top table. That this is directly talking about your relationship with God, and it's just enfleshed in the way you treat your parents. Now listen, I don't know. I really don't know. I really think it can go both ways. I really do. If I had to choose, I would say it goes with the top table because of the wording. But regardless of however you classify this commandment, one thing is very, very sure, that the way we treat our parents is something God takes very, very personally. Okay? You need to remember that. So all you kids, yeah, you don't want to hear this sermon today, do you? Right? Yeah. So Exodus chapter 20, we're going to start reading in verse 1. We're going to read these 17 verses, and we'll come back. How many of you are memorizing? Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Man, about 4 or 5 weeks ago when we started this sermon series, I asked you how many of you would commit to memorizing these 17 verses, and there was more hands that went up. Oh, my goodness. How many of you are memorizing? We got, Andy's like, I don't know. But we got time. We got time. Next week, I won't be in the pulpit, and we're on the 5th commandment, so we've got about 4 more weeks. And so we got time. So please keep trying to memorize these 17 commandments. It's not the 10 that get you, is it? I mean, really, anybody can memorize the 10. It's those, it's some of those commands that has extra, right? Like the idol. I mean, it just keeps going on and on about that. But we got time. Listen, if I can memorize these things with my brain mixed up the way it is, surely you can do it. So let me ask you again. Who's committing to memorizing these 17 verses? Okay. All right. Exodus chapter 20, verse 1. Follow along with me. Then God gave the people all these instructions. I am the Lord your God who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery. You must not have any other God but me. You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or an image of anything in the heavens or on the earth or in the sea. You must not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God who will not tolerate your affection for any other gods. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even the children in the 3rd and 4th generations of those who reject me. But I lavish unfailing love for 1,000 generations on those who love me and obey my commands. You must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you use his name. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest, dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons, your daughters, and male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and everything in them, but on the 7th day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. Honor your father and mother. Then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God has given you. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. You must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Okay, that's the 12. That's the 12. Go back to verse, I'm sorry, that's the 10. That's the 10. So go back to verse 12. What's it say? Yeah, honor your father and mother, then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Before we talk about what this 6th commandment requires of us, I want us to think about what a family is, okay? What a family is and what God expects out of us in relation to those we call family. I find it very, very, very interesting that God does not command us to love our parents, but rather to what? Honor our parents. I find that very, very interesting because I think that I think most of us would think that love would be the highest debt that we owe our parents, wouldn't you? But that's not the way God structured the family. It's honor that God commands. Now, someone could say, probably a kid could say, why in the world should we honor our parents? Why should we honor our parents? And someone else could say, probably a parent could say, you should honor your parents out of gratitude, right? Out of gratitude. After all, they brought you into the world. If they never do anything else for you, you're alive, right? So you should be grateful. Be grateful. Now, the problem with saying that kids ought to honor their parents out of gratitude is that I would say most of the people who say that have probably never been around kids, right? Because let's be honest, are kids grateful? No, they're not grateful. I know you think your precious baby is perfect, but kids are not grateful. In fact, I think it's their full-time job being ungrateful. I told you, and I'm dead serious, I'm not embellishing this. I've been around kids more the last 2 years than I have since I was a kid. I mean, I've been a pastor a long time, and so I've been around a lot of kids, but that was just like, a couple hours on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. Then I could go home and say, whoa, I'm glad that's over, right? I mean, I'm serious, and now they're coming over all the time. They walk in, they know where everything's at, don't they? One of them came in, I said, you want some chips? I know where they are. I'll get them, right? I'll get them. We have sections of our house that are just for kids. We got the coloring page section, and we got baskets for their crayons and all that stuff. We got toys that I bought them that they completely ruined, so I'm going to have to buy more toys. And now, you're not going to believe this. This one girl's into balloons, okay? The kind you blow up and they're real long and you make stuff out of them. I bet I blew up 50 balloons the other night. And she made something that doesn't resemble anything, but she calls it an animal. And she didn't take them home with her. I said, don't you want to? No, you can keep them. We spent 30 minutes busting them last night or something like that. But my point is, the one thing I've found out about kids is they're not grateful. I'm serious. And the reason they're not grateful is because they take everything for granted. That's exactly why. And it's impossible to show gratitude to someone that you take for granted. Impossible. And so kids just take everything for granted, and we did too. I mean, my goodness, we did too. We took for granted that we had food to eat and all that stuff. We take it for granted. But I guess what I'm saying is, to say that kids should be grateful, that's something that kids don't feel, right? Seriously. That comes later, after they grow up. Hopefully sooner rather than later, right? And especially when they get their own ungrateful kids, that's when it really hit home, right? I'm serious. I'm not getting on you kids, but that's just the way it is. To say that we should honor our parents out of gratitude, that's just not going to get you anywhere. So let's ask the question, why should we honor our parents? Why should we honor our parents? Well, biblically speaking, and that's what we're after, right? I mean, you're not after my opinion. I'm not after your opinion. We're after whose opinion? God's opinion, okay? Now, biblically speaking, we should honor our parents because God has given them authority over you. Say the word. Authority. God has given them authority over you. You need to understand, authority is the backbone of the family. It really is. When God created the family, He structured it on the lines of, say the word, authority. He did. Now, I completely get it. And what I mean is, we live in a culture that hates authority, don't we? I mean, I'm serious. There are people, if they could, would dismantle all systems of authority. We see that happening in our country today, right? I mean, we literally see it. Get rid of the police, get rid of Border Patrol, all of that stuff. And that's because they're based on systems of authority. That's right. But you need to understand, we're not talking about authoritarianism. That's not godly, is it? We're just talking about how God structured everything, and I'm telling you, God structured the family based on we give our parents honor because God has given them authority over us. So let's talk about how this fifth commandment applies to both parents and children. Okay, let's start with the parents. The first thing you need to know, and the most important thing you need to know as a parent, is God comes first. You hear me? God comes first. This is the beginning of parenting. This is what it is to be a parent worthy of honor. God comes first, not your children. God comes first. Okay? Your life is not to be a child-centered life. Your marriage is not to be a child-centered marriage. Your life is to be a God-centered life. God comes first, okay? And all of your needs must be met in the Lord, in Him alone. The biggest need we have is to be loved. Do you understand that? Now, I know there's a lot of people, hard-hearted people. I don't need to be loved. I don't care. But God created us with needs. And our biggest need is to be loved. And I need you to understand, if all of your needs are not met in the Lord, then when they hand you that beautiful baby, guess what's going to happen? That baby will become your entire life. I mean, it will. You will live through that child. You really will. Because you need something that are not being met in the Lord. If God doesn't come first, you will live through that child. And so your affirmation, your identity will be in being a mother or father. But you've got to understand, that's not how any of this works. God comes first. That is the beginning of parenting. That is what it is to be a parent worthy of honor. God comes first. So let's ask the question, what is your job as a parent? What is your job as a parent? Well, I'm going to make it real simple for you. Or somebody who's a parent, tell me. And I'll tell you you're wrong. And I'm sorry, I'm just kidding. But I'm looking for something specific, and I know it's hard for you to search for that. So what is your job as a parent? Yes. Yeah, she nailed it. I mean, I'd say it a different way. I mean, I know parents think they have a lot of different jobs, and they do. But the number one job you have as a parent is to gradually transfer their dependence away from you to where it rests solely upon the Lord. Does that make sense? That's pretty much what you said. Let me say it again. Your number one job is to gradually transfer their dependence from you to where it rests solely upon the Lord. When your children are little, they are completely dependent upon you, right? I mean, they really are. And you know that. That's your responsibility. But I'm telling you, as they grow, your job is to train them up in the Lord and then release them in the Lord. Does that make sense? Because here's what happens. If you don't do that, then when you release your son or daughter, that daughter's going to go out to try to find a man who will complete her. Who will, she will have that need for affirmation, but that's not the way any of this works. For those of you who have daughters, your job is to train her up in the Lord to where when she gets older, she doesn't need anything but Jesus. Does that make sense? I mean, that's it. She won't need to be affirmed by a man. She won't need her identity to be in a mother or a wife. No, her identity will rest in being a child of God and a child of God alone. Does that make sense? I mean, that's the way all of this works. Let me say this. For those of you who have kids or are getting to the age of parenting, don't you ever let your son or daughter date someone who's not serious about the Lord. I'm serious. Don't you ever let them do that. And listen, you can tell if they're serious about the Lord, right? I mean, anybody can say, well, yeah, I was saved and baptized when I was 12 years old. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, it can, but it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean they're serious about the Lord, does it? No. All you got to do is spend a week with someone. If you spend a week with someone and you can't tell they don't really love the Lord, guess what? They don't love the Lord. And what I'm saying is, don't you ever let your kids date anyone who is not serious about the Lord. In all this business, I can't think of what their name was, Jennifer. In the first church I pastored, What was that crazy little girl's name? I mean, she was running up and down the hall. What was her name? I don't think they listened. Anyway, there was this little girl at church. She was a terror. I mean, she was all the time getting in trouble, doing whatever she wanted to do and everything. And I think she was like 8 or 9 years old or something like that. And I brought her parents into the office. I said, what's going on? You're going to have to get a hold of this girl. And I had a good relationship, with all of them. And I said, and they said, well, we want our daughter to grow up to be a free thinker. That's what he said. To be a free thinker. We want to let her make those decisions. And I looked at them and I said, listen, I've always been there for you, right? I love you. We got a relationship where we can say anything we want. And say, yeah, we know. And I said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Because here's the thing. Your job is to train your children up in the Lord and release them in the Lord. Not to let them make their own decisions when they're young. Because I'm telling you, if you don't make the decisions for them, the world is lining up to make it. And it used to be the world, now it's schools. Okay? All right, that's the parents' responsibility. So let's talk about the kids' responsibility. What does it mean to honor your parents? It's interesting, the Hebrew word for honor here is to weigh. That's literally what it means, to weigh. And so the idea is your parents should have more weight. Does that make sense? So whatever your parents try to teach you, that should carry more weight than what other people try to teach you. Do you see the biblical idea here? And so your parents' preferences, their opinions should have more weight than anyone else. But you need to remember what we said about the Ten Commandments from the very beginning. Okay, you got to understand, we talked about how Jesus deepens and transforms the Ten Commandments, right? That we have to look at all these Ten Commandments through the lens of Christ. Because we don't live by law, we live by faith in grace, right? So, what is it that Jesus shows us? How does Jesus' teaching and example show us how to follow this commandment? I would say it like this. I don't think I put this in your bulletin. I may have. We take everything Jesus taught us about how to treat people, and we apply that double to our parents. Does that make sense? Okay, Jesus taught a lot about how we should treat people, right? What did he say we should do? Go ahead, say the word. Love, absolutely. Love. He told us to love people, right? And so we should apply that doubly to our parents. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, it's called the love chapter, right? So love is, you remember? Who said it? Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy. It does not take counts of wrong. Keep a list of wrongs, right? And so we should apply that to our parents. Do you understand? Love is patient. We should be patient with our parents. Love is kind. My goodness, I find it really, really interesting how we can be kind to a lot of people we don't even know, but so hateful to our own family. Have you ever noticed that about yourself? I'm serious. Like you could be in Walmart and you could strike up a conversation with a stranger and you could be so kind to them, right? But mom and daddy called and said, what do you want? Right? I mean, serious. I mean, you could be so kind to the people that you work with all week, but you go home and they get the worst of you, right? I mean, love is patient, love is kind. This should apply double to our parents. Love keeps no record of wrong. What about that one? Love keeps no record of wrong. There's a whole lot of people that's keeping a list of wrongs about their parents, right? I mean, there really are. And listen, I get it. I don't, but I've been a pastor a long time and I've heard the stories. You can say you don't know what my parents did or didn't do. But we got to understand, even if I did, that doesn't alleviate your responsibility to love your parents, right? It really doesn't. And before we stop, let me just say this. I know a lot of people could say, Pastor, it's really, really easy for you to say all this about your parents. It really is. You had great parents. And I did. I do. Great parents. Parents that loved me. Parents that always took care of me. I mean, when I was a teenager, like 16, 17 years old, it was kind of annoying. Kind of annoying because I would be out on a date or something, and I'd come home late. Mom, Dad be up waiting. Where you been? Hey? Where you been? I thought that was annoying. But I've talked to so many people over the years who would tell me, Pastor, I would love for someone to care about me enough to stay up and yell at me. I mean, I've heard a lot of horror stories over the years. There's a lot of people who have bitterness and just hatred toward their parents because of what they did. And again, I don't get it, but you have to forgive. You do. You have to forgive. So the question is, how do we honor parents who are not worthy of honor? I mean, that's the question. How do we do that? Because again, I've talked to a lot of people whose parents were, let me just say it, were deadbeats. I've talked to a lot of people. How do we do that? The one thing you got to remember is God will never ask you to do something that He doesn't give you the strength to do. Does that make sense? He won't. And let me say this. When we forgive our parents and then honor them through that, does that mean we forget what they did? Absolutely not. It just means that you don't have to live with that bitterness and hatred all of your life, because I can count probably 10 to 20 people right now that I know that I've counseled over the years who still carry that around. And I tell them, I said, this is no kind of life for you to live. And again, they said, you don't understand. I would say most of us in this room, we can't even comprehend that because we've had good parents. But the fact of the matter is, we honor our parents because God, what? Said so. That's the reason we do it. Honor your father and mother, then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God has given you. Honor your father and mother. Pray with me.